Okay, so it's past 8 o'clock. We'll get moving on with the budget meeting. I just want to make sure everybody online is out there. Vicki Dawson?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, Rusty? You out there? Rusty? He was on mute?
He is on mute, or if that's his number.
Joe, are you out there?
Yep, he's got a thumbs up.
Okay, do we confirm yet with Rusty?
No, I don't have anything yet.
It says he's on. I say he's on mute.
He must be on mute, yep. Because I showed him on mute.
Rusty, blink twice if you can hear us. Did he respond? That's it.
I can hear you, I'm just dialing in.
Oh, okay. Well, wait a second here, Rusty's dialing in.
No,
Oh, he can hear us. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll start the meeting then. This is the June 3rd budget meeting. And Tyson, if you're out there, I assume you are since you got control of the screen, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, so today I just wanted to continue our discussions on the 2020 and 2021 budgets. When we met about a month ago, there were a lot of unknowns, so I felt at that time we needed to have another meeting in June. So since then, we have a lot better understanding and direction on programming, Courts Plus, events, concessions, etc. But we still have a lot of unknowns at this point. So today I just wanted to provide a legislative update, just some updates on some COVID-19 funding that's available, go through revenue projections through the end of the year, budget reductions we've identified to date, and then just go through the anticipated budget updates for 2021. I don't anticipate the meeting taking 2 hours. I was going through my stuff yesterday, but really I guess up to the questions and any other additional items we wanted to discuss, but I'm hoping we can be out of here within the first hour. Any questions? We can move on to the legislative update. Okay, so on 2021 budget, there have not been any further discussions on delaying the budget process. So we're continuing to move forward with the August 10th deadline. Right now, directors, department heads are working on compiling their first revision. Those first documents are due back to me by next Friday. I'll compile everything. We'll kind of work together as a team and start cutting the budgets down and balancing the budget for next year. So we're still working forward and moving forward with the August 10th deadline in mind. So as far as COVID relief funding, right now there are two sources of funding for COVID related expenses. There's the CARES Act funding and there's FEMA funding. So with CARES Act, North Dakota received $1.25 billion in funding. In order for expenses to be eligible, they must meet 3 criteria. So that to be necessary expenses due to the public health emergency in response to COVID-19. They were not accounted for in our budget and they were incurred in March through December of this year. The FEMA funding, there's a lot of overlap. So it's basically just eligible emergency protective measure expenses. So there's a lot of overlap between the two of what's going to be covered. So there was a webinar put on 2 weeks ago by North Dakota OMB, and kind of what their initial plan is they want all entities to submit through both sources, just because there is so much overlap. So they recommend submitting through FEMA, the FEMA portal. What they're hoping is that FEMA will provide reimbursement up to 75% of our expenses. And then North Dakota OMB will monitor that. They'll work with FEMA and they would provide funding for that additional 25%. We submitted our initial expenses yesterday. It ended up being about $18,500 of what we've incurred so far to date. It's not a lot, but it's something. So we'll continue monitoring those expenses. We'll continue tracking them and coding them, and we'll continue submitting for reimbursement later in the year. But yeah, so our initial expenses have been submitted. We haven't seen anything on revenue, funding for revenue loss yet, and that's where we're going to see the most significant amount of dollars. So there was some discussions at the legislative level, probably about a few weeks ago. The bill was denied, so they are talking about providing some funding for lost revenue, but nothing's been finalized at this point.
Tyson?
Yeah.
Can you give us an idea what the 18,500 is comprised of? Just
Yep.
a broad explanation would be just fine. Thank you.
Yeah, so a lot of the PPE type stuff, the masks, a lot of the plexiglass shields we're putting up as partitions between workstations, sanitizer, the COVID-19, the signage that we put up at the parks for that when they were closed, and for when, kind of just the guidelines. That makes up the majority of it.
So none of this is from for salary or wages for employees?
Nope, it's not. So in order for us to submit for reimbursement, they would have to have not been accounted for in our budget. So we would have either had to hire additional staff, or we would have had staff working overtime. And we
Sure.
didn't have any of that. So
if we paid someone because they had to be home because of exposure or actually having it, that would not fit within this reimbursement?
So those are eligible for reimbursement through the state. The state's requested that we don't submit those until the end at this point. So we did an initial assessment where the state reached out and requested all of our estimated expenses through May. There ended up being $1.6 billion in reimbursements submitted. So that they're asking that we hold on to those type of expenses till the end, and we see if there's any funding left available at the end and submit. But my assumption is that money's going to be gone by that point.
So the 1.6 billion was everyone in the state who submitted?
Yep, and that was just through May. So this funding's available through December 30th. So.
Wow. Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions on the legislative update? Okay, so next I'll move into the revenue impacts. So just start out by saying that these are estimates. You know, they're being updated every week, every month as new information becomes available. So we've been doing this exercise just to kind of project where we're going to be at the end of the year. Initially, when I started this, I was looking at a $3.4 million revenue loss. Golf has done a lot better than we anticipated. Ports Plus restrictions are starting to be lifted, so we're starting to see, we're starting to get a better idea, but it's still right now is a really rough estimate. So we'll continue updating this as we go, but right now 2.4 million is what we're projecting. So I put together this schedule to come up with that 2.4 million. So what I started with is what we budgeted in revenues through April 30th of this year, what we actually collected through April 30th of this year, and then our actual surplus or deficit. So you can see we're only down $12,000 in revenue from what we budgeted. The May revenue decrease projection, we were pretty much shut down for May. So pretty much assume that everything we budgeted in revenue for May, we weren't going to be collecting. June through December, so this is where we're doing the majority of our assumptions and basically our best guess at this point in time. So through June through December, I just took 50% reduction in budgeted revenue. So our budgeted revenue and program is about 420,000 through this time frame. I'm assuming we're only going to collect 50% of it. And so we did that through each category, just basically making our best guess. So going through some of these, the actual surplus or deficits. So programming and events were shut down. They were impacted by COVID. So that's why we're seeing those losses there. Concessions, they had a pretty good winter with arenas, and it was a pretty good time for concessions to be shut down, just the transition between seasons. So we are actually still a little bit ahead of revenue through April on our concessions, but we're going to start seeing impacts on that through May and then going forward. Golf, like I mentioned, golf was doing a lot better than we anticipated. Membership sales are up quite a bit this year compared to prior years and what we budgeted. So we're actually up 200,000 in revenue just due to membership sales. So we will be impacted later in the year because the events, we're still working through that and kind of seeing what impact that's going to have. Also, the more memberships we have sell at the beginning of the year, the less tee times and the individual people paying green fees we're going to have later on in the year. So that's why
Tyson, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm on. Do you know of that 200,000? Do you know roughly, just percentage-wise, what is like season passes and what are green fee carts?
I don't off the top of my head. I can run that for you if you'd like.
Yeah, just it's out of curiosity. No big deal. I was just kind of curious.
Carts should be down.
Revenue line up.
I'm anticipating carts should be down just because we've got the later start and we weren't offering them initially, but I don't know for sure.
No, that's fine. Thanks.
So facilities were up 25,000 in revenue. The main reason for that is we received an additional insurance reimbursement check for the sports arena this year that we didn't budget. So if we didn't have that, we'd be down in revenues in that line. Neighborhood parks, pools, park operations were down a little bit. So administration were up. Main reason for that, so state aid, our first quarter state aid check came in. It came in higher than what we budgeted for last year. So that was good. We received some additional insurance money. So we're insured through North Dakota Insurance Reserve Fund. Last year they had a really good year and they provided us some of their profits from last year. They dispersed it out to the entities. So we weren't expecting that. So that was another nice surprise. And then property taxes. So those are up from last year or from what we budgeted. Property taxes are a little tricky because it could just be a timing difference. You know, we get them when people pay. So people just could have paid earlier this year than last year. But we'll continue to look at these lines and kind of monitor and update as we go forward. And forestry, again, is property taxes. So that's the mill levy funding. And then Courts Plus is the big one where we're being impacted, where we're shut down.
How is Courts Plus doing? I mean, I see all the things. I mean, have we lost memberships? Are we doing okay on memberships? Have we had a good number come back, or where are we at?
We have got 56 brand new members that came in, which in the month of May, which was 6 more than what we had budgeted for. And they came in basically in the last 2 weeks because we were closed the first 2 weeks. We have several families who have a desire to use the child watch that are on hold, but our numbers there are pretty equal with what normally has been on hold in past years. We've had some cancellations, but at this point, it's not like a huge exit. So I would say at this point, I don't have the exact comparison, but what I've heard and what I've seen with our membership, we are not down significantly like we thought we might be.
Carolyn, can you tell if the influx of new members are people who were maybe attending a place or participating or a member of a place in Minnesota that's been closed?
I can find that out. If we do always ask questions.
Yeah, it's not overly important. I was curious if we would see any kind of influx because of the difference in Moorhead's opening versus ours for gyms and fitness facilities.
A lot more of it is just they have been guests, and because we are not allowing guests, they are now becoming.
Sure, sure. And the outdoor classes seem to be well received from what I can tell.
Yeah, when you watch people's behavior, they are much more comfortable outside right now than coming into a Group X class. Though we are seeing that grow as we take reservations and people see how the spacing works in the different rooms.
Do you anticipate, I'm sorry, I'm getting us off topic, but do you anticipate us continuing those outdoor classes?
I think in the summer, they may very well be, because again, the impact has been positive, and it's another way that we can service members and make people comfortable. Obviously, when it gets cold, it'll be difficult to offer them.
Yep, absolutely. I love it. Thank you. Sorry for the segue.
Oh, that's fine.
Carolyn, have you seen people putting contracts on vacation in lieu of canceling? And I think it's probably an easy time to do that going into the summertime. Hopefully we can still retain them, but just put it on the back end.
That is what the staff has been doing. When I say they go on hold, that's what that means, is that they are basically waiting for us to open Child Watch, waiting for us to open more of our opportunities for them, instead of canceling and saying, I can't go and do it today. And so Logan and Kelly and the staff, that is their first and foremost request when people say, I want to cancel. And again, based on the numbers in the previous summers, we are about where we have been. And it hasn't been that it's, you know, twice the number. Obviously, the longer we have to delay opening certain things, the more people that we will get that will be on hold and potentially cancel. But initially, we're seeing them have some patience.
Perfect, thank you.
So Course Plus is one area that's looking a lot better this month than it was a month ago. Initially, I was budgeting a 50% reduction budgeted revenue. And then, as Carolyn said, memberships are looking pretty good right now. So talking with Kelly and Carolyn kind of dropped that number down to 25%. So are there any other questions on the revenue projections? Okay, so next I'll just move into the potential budget reductions. So this is what we've identified through today. So if you notice that the totals here are the same, the $2.6 million, I just broke them down into basically two different ways of reporting it. So one, I broke it down by category and then by department. So with personnel, we've identified about $437,000 in potential budget reductions that are available. So that's the deputy director salaries, not hiring that position, and then part-time savings that we have just with seasonal staff and the reduction and hiring them later than anticipated. Operating, so those are the expenses for basically the AgriLime, gas and oil. Gas is really cheap right now, so we did a 10% reduction there. Just basically reductions in services, and we looked at our operating budgets and where we're not going to be spending the money that we had anticipated initially. Professional development, pretty self-explanatory, about $90,000. We're just not traveling right now. If we do have any staff that need certifications, we're encouraging the remote, the webinars, so our travel expense is going down significantly, about $90,000. And then the big item is the capitals and capital transfer. So that's the 1.8 million. So right now we've identified 2.6 million to date. So we do have enough reductions to cover what we're projecting in revenues right as of today. And then below, just the same information, just broke down by department. Any questions on this?
Can you move the screen to the next page, to that page?
Can you not see it, Rusty?
I'm seeing the prior screen, but not what you just went through.
Can everybody else see the budget reduction screen?
I see the potential budget reductions by category screen that Tyson just went to. Rusty, you're just a little slow. Joe, what do you
And
see?
if I can't get there, I'll pull it up on my iPad.
I'm seeing what you're seeing, potential budget reduction by category.
Okay, so Rusty, just let me know if you have any questions, but we'll move on to the next section here.
Okay.
So next, this is just the 2021 budget edition. So similar document to what we discussed at the last budget meeting. I just incorporated some of the feedback that we received. So mill levy the general fund, this number changed a little bit. When I made a mistake when I put together the initial assessment. So right now when we're budgeting for our mill levies, we're using the estimated property valuations. Well, by the time the county actually certifies it, they're using the actual. So there's a difference between what we're budgeting for the for property valuations and what we actually collect. So the county adjusts our mill levy rate, so we keep the revenue that we projected. So using the actual mill levy rates, that dropped that number down a little bit. So just if you're looking at the previous schedule, that's why that number changed a little. Golf fee increases, we have 25,000. We brought this to facilities last week, and it's going to be going to the full board next week. So last time we decided that we wouldn't increase fees, but we were thinking more on the programming side. Golf fees, we would like to move forward with a 1.2% increase, which is the CPI index for that period. State aid decrease, I'm still projecting 600,000 at this point. I've been working with the North Dakota League of Cities. I've been working with the city of Fargo and some other entities. Really right now, it's kind of across the board. I mean, 10 to 20%, and this is about 20% decrease. We won't know until July. We won't have a really good understanding idea until July. So right now, I'm just going with the 20%, and it seems to be in line with other entities of what they're doing.
And Tyson, this is Dave. I talked to Bruce Grove a little bit on some of this, and they actually said their sales revenues were up for this part of the year, which kind of surprised them too. I know that doesn't, you can quantify that across the state, but they were a little surprised that their revenues are up. So hopefully it might not be as bad as we think.
Yeah, I've heard that too. But then I've also heard on the other side where people think it's really bad just because of the oil revenues and everything else. So we might not be impacted as much as we're thinking, but I think 600,000 is a conservative estimate. So next on the compensation pool increases, those are the same numbers that we presented last time. Seasonal staff changes, the same thing. So for staff, I added in the salary savings for the deputy director since we won't be moving forward with that position. Block 9 Plaza, I still have the 200,000 of additional costs in there, just not assuming we're not going to get the corporate sponsorships that we're budgeting. And then I also added in the new IT contract, so there should be some savings there next year. So in total, the net amount available will be about 55,000. So we're about status quo where we were last year. Next on the potential staff additions, I know the comment was made last time that would be nice to see the salary ranges. So I had Diane and Stacy kind of put together just a preliminary range of where those positions would be at. Not included in the totals up top, but they'll be evaluated during 2020, 2021 and brought forward if we deem it appropriate. So any questions on any of that so far? The last thing I wanted to discuss is the foundation. So 3 years ago, we provided $100,000 to hire a director at the foundation. That director was never hired, but the funds have been used to offset some operating costs. So the main expense for those funds is a portion of VSS admin assistant salaries. We've been doing an allocation at the end of the year for her time that she spent on the foundation, and using those funds to reimburse VSS for those. So I did a breakdown of what we have in Fund 4. So Fund 4 is where we track our foundation cash balance through the Park District. So right now the cash balance is $217,000. We have 33,000 that we've committed for grants, but we have not paid out yet. We have 132,000 that we're committed for future foundation grants. So that's the 200,000 that we've provided so far for each year for the grants. So right now we have about 51,000 for foundation operating funds remaining. At the end, that will get us through this year. In 2021, we'll be running out of money. So we basically need direction on kind of move forward with the foundation. You know, there's been discussion about the foundation being a self-sustaining entity. I don't know if that's going to be possible from the Park District standpoint unless we get involved in the gaming and alcohol sales. Really, I just wanted to bring it to your attention. I don't know that we need to provide another $100,000 for the grants for next year, just because we have $132,000 available currently. But just wanted to get this on your radar. That's an item that we need to address and look at and kind of determine how we want to move forward.
Tyson, do you have anything budgeted in there currently, that 100, or is that pulled out right now?
Well, sorry, Rusty, I missed that.
Do you have the 100,000 showing for budgeted for 2021, or there's nothing in there for now?
You know, I haven't put anything, so I haven't started compiling that yet.
Okay. I would think it looks like there's enough in there, and that's something that we wouldn't have to dedicate necessarily for 2021, just considering with where we are with the rest of the budget.
Yeah, that was kind of my thoughts too. I don't know that we'll need another additional 100,000 just based on the activity that we've had in there for the past couple of years. But then it's, do we want to provide some money for the operations? Is kind of the question that I'm kind of getting to.
Yeah, kind of the question is, does the Park District fund the operating expenses of the foundation? As Tyson mentioned, without having any revenue sales or revenue for the foundation directly from alcohol sales or gaming, and we don't have any really philanthropy about people donating or gifting money to the foundation as a revenue source like colleges and universities do. Can it be self-sustaining? You know, I think Bismarck has a foundation for a while. Grand Forks had one that I think during the Choice Health and Fitness fundraising campaign, they kind of operated like that. But since Bill Palmasino took over for John Staley, they more used it as a capital campaign foundation and similar to Bismarck. So right now, I don't know if there's any self-sustaining foundations within the state of North Dakota, and that's kind of our question. Without having a reliable revenue source, can we do that, or does anybody have any ideas?
What does the operating look like for the year?
Tyson, I mean, it's basically paying for, since we don't have a director, it's paying for administrative services from Chrissy, and then printing. What other items are there, Tyson?
That's pretty much majority of it. There might be some meals if they take somebody out for, you know, sports complex meeting, but that's pretty much it. I mean, the majority of it is salaries for the admin assistant
And supplies.
Well, the next, question I have is, when Brian agreed to fill that void, that was on a temporary basis. So the question becomes, is he comfortable continuing in his dual roles at this point? And that's to me a big question, and what he sees. I guess I'd like to know Brian's position.
And Brian might not be on yet. He's going to join us a little bit later. He's got an appointment. I talked to Tyson a little bit too, as you take these donations, I don't know how, I'm not a fundraising expert, but, colleges and universities, say you get a $1 million donation, do you take 5% off the top of that, use that for operating costs for your foundation? I don't know, you also say Shields donates, money towards the sports complex, you take 5% of that, and that goes into the operating, side of the foundation. Or if somebody donates $1,000, you take 5% of that to sustain it.
And what are the goals for the foundation? That, that's the first thing. The goal is to raise funds for the sports complex, period. Then all of that determination is focused on that one thing and it's short term. But it's the goal of the foundation to build a sustaining foundation for the park district that partners on giving grants to our partners and becomes more of a philanthropic endeavor. And so that would, to me, we have to decide what is the goal of the foundation, and then we can decide how to allocate funds. And sometimes it's not as simple as 5% goes here. It's we need X amount to cover, and maybe it's 1%, maybe it's 5%, and you can set a cap. But that would be my opinion.
Yeah, and as I said before, I think Bismarck and Grand Forks use it as we're gonna do a capital campaign. We want the foundation so people can give to that, get their tax benefits from it. Grand Forks tried to do that when John Staley was there, was try to have it more of a typical foundation, but they've since gone back.
Because we've been kind of operating loosely on both, well, not loosely, we've been operating on that, full package at the moment, because we haven't received a lot of funds coming in, but we've been visiting with people about that, but we've been funding it to get it going on the grant side of it. And so that it's twofold that way, and that's the direction we're going. And I think that's just, we should have a discussion on, is that the proper thing to do for the future?
Yeah, I agree. I think that, the foundation's still in the incubator stage, and we need to look at it for what's the long-term view. I think it might be a little early to, pull a plug on it, so to speak, but,
and it's very needed right now during the capital campaign. It's kind of, once this gets built, does it continue on? But we still need some type of revenue coming in to kind of handle those if you take somebody out for lunch, printing supplies, staffing supplies, and if you're just funneling park district funds through that to the foundation, is that right? You almost need to shave a percent here or 5% there of incoming funds, and then you got to be open and honest. People contribute money saying, we're going to use some of this for our foundation operating costs.
Yeah, we have to determine our fundraising or revenue streams.
Yeah.
Should we get into gaming?
If Brian was here, he could touch on that, but since he's not here, we can't.
I think we should wait until Brian is available to visit about what the opportunities are.
So on the board for Boys and Girls Club, they lost slammers up at River Lanes. They generate, they just went with another organization for Republic, but they generate 356,659 in gaming deposits. So there's a lot of revenue to be had.
That's a year.
Yeah.
I think Brian's big concern with it from discussions with him is the amount of time it takes to do that.
Yeah, and this could be, blackjack and everything else. Now, I don't know that, but Robin's got set up with that. It's really never been discussed with each facility of what they have for gaming. Some of it could just be pull cards.
But I think what Brian says, as Pete says, is you need somebody an expert in that area.
And when we looked into it before, we weren't, thinking of hiring somebody to do that. We were trying to do all of this with the folks we have and our own horsepower, so to speak. And
But it's something that we want to look at. I'm sure Robin would be open to having that discussion of what it costs. They don't have a gaming person there, but they got one of the board people or a volunteer that handles that. Not how they handle it, I don't know that part of it, but.
So I think the question is, Tyson, do we need to put some funds again in that account for 2021, correct? Because we'll be zeroed out at the end of this year for operating costs.
Yeah, I mean, there should still be some available at the end of this year, but it's not going to last us through 2021. mean, the main thing is I wanted to just get this as a discussion to kind of get it on everybody's radar that it's something we need to look into and decide. I think we would probably, if we continue operating like we have been, I think we probably need like 40,000 next year to get us through. But yeah, it's definitely, I think that the future and how we want to move forward with the foundation is definitely something that we need to discuss and we need to decide.
Okay, thanks, Tyson.
That's really all that I have. Other topics anybody else wanted to discuss?
Anything related to the budget? Questions, concerns?
Yeah, maybe Tyson just touch on a couple things, and you might not know these answers, but looking at categories, and one I can think of is swimming. You know, we can look at the revenue side, but then knowing, you know, that there's going to be less people. On the cost side, and I don't know if you've looked into, you know, what is the fixed cost and what's the variable cost? And even when we're losing revenue, how does it look on the expense side? And if you're really not able to cut any costs, I mean, does it even look worse than it is, or are you scaling back on some of that, just knowing that you're not going to have as many people there, but I realize you still need coverage as far as lifeguards go.
And so Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but my understanding, I don't think from the expense side, I don't think we're going to be cutting anything on pools just because of the additional cleaning and everything else. I think we're going to be reallocating, you know, we might have lifeguards that originally were planning on, you know, guarding the pool, but they're going to be cleaning and, you know, keeping up with the disinfecting and trying to follow the CDC guidelines. So
we're going to reassign some of the people that, from the guard standpoint, or cashiers, that can also overlap and clean. We've had trainings, 3 of them last night, 4 of them last night, 1 today. So Dave's covered a lot of that, but then the managers go into greater detail in each facility or each pool. So yeah, we're not adding additional staff, we're just reallocating some of the responsibilities within each pool.
Well, just remember that where Tyson was talking about those funds before, if we have to utilize people for purposes that we never would have had to utilize people before, and it would put stress on, you know, the staff you would have normally had, that's where those funds can be allocated. You know, like for example, my son just spent the month of May taking temperatures at my wife's office before people came in to see the doctors. They could have tried to put that on the front desk gals, but that was going to be too much or whatever. And so they used PPP loan money or whatever that fund is called to pay him to do that. Anyway, just keep that.
Yeah, and I think if we add any additional staff, that might be available for reimbursement. I think, Kevin, correct me, are we looking at adding another manager per shift or not?
No.
No, okay. So I think right now it'd just be our existing staff.
And it's, you know, it's not a lot. You know, it's really, as the guards are leaving their chair, they're wiping it down, or the new guards that are coming up will clean their chair. It's monitoring the deck that they already do to make sure people are social distancing. And then there's, you know, chemical that they can spray on. So it's walking through the locker rooms to spray on those handles and those nozzles, stuff like that, that would be able to disinfect those areas.
And is the capacity going from 50 to 75%? Did I read that?
Yeah, it went from, on Friday, it went from orange to green or yellow to green. So it went from 50 to 75% capacity or a max of 500. So that's 50% capacity at Island Park Pool. North is 250, 300. So we're 75% capacity there. 75% capacity basically at other pools, which in June, you know, you probably only hit 100% capacity a handful of times in June. due to weather, so.
And one of the issues that we'll run up against is making sure that on the deck, that they're social distancing. So
Right.
you ever gonna get to that 75%? I doubt it, because a lot of people come there to, sunbathe or whatever. So having that balance, that's a tricky situation right now. Now the guards and staff are going around this week to mark out those 6 feet distancing of deck chairs and that, and putting X's down where they need to be. So it's going to be change on the fly, so to speak, that we'll make these decisions as they come. It's, obviously you can only have so many people on deck. And
I know you can't tell anything, but I mean, theoretically, if things go well, you could look at maybe opening up to that blue phase, maybe in July, where you open it up to normal operating conditions.
Nice.
Well, it's gonna be challenging too for, most of our staff is young and enforcing this social distancing. So I assume we're teaching them patience and to not take on confrontation if that arises.
Yep, and we've got pretty good managers, assistant managers that got a lot of experience. So that'll be a plus. Yeah, there's gonna be times where it's gonna be a little bit contentious down there, but.
And we went from 2 swim sessions to 3.
Yeah. So. And the lessons in the month of June are out. So the good thing too is the Boys and Girls Club and the YMCA will not be busing at least for the month of June. So that will help. Now, the more it rules closed, that's another issue. So.
Kevin, any idea on our pool pass sales? Like season passes or swim passes?
Once we open, we'll have better numbers. They're coming in, pretty heavily right now. So we'll.
And is it correct that for each session, if you are you're paying for a session? So if you wanted to go to all 3 sessions, you'd have to pay 3 times in that day? Is that right?
Correct. That's
Okay.
correct.
So that might drive more season passes.
Correct. Yep.
And Kevin, is the theory behind that it gets more of a variety of people if we're at capacity? Is that and then allows for more cleaning time? Is that kind of the theory?
That's the theory. Yep.
Thank you.
Who knows, it was 98 or whatever on Monday.
Yeah.
Could be a hot summer.
Last time it is.
Could be.
Just never know.
Just a quick question. What would we do if somebody called us up and said that, they were there yesterday and they tested positive today or something? I don't know.
Our first call is what Brian does. We've talked this at directors meeting or weekly, or three times a week that we meet, but it's Colin Breton, the epidemiologist for Cass Public Health, and get his acknowledgement of what we need to do. Obviously, we'd probably end up closing that facility for a time period, depending on whether it's a staff person and or a patron. So that would be the first step of that.
Are there guidelines in what the CDC has put out as far as pool use, as far as turnaround of reopening, or?
Nothing that I've seen, no.
Because, yesterday I went to the Osgood Hornbachers and came from the south side and was driving through the parking lot, and I'm like, God, these parking lots are empty. This is weird. So I went in, and whatever. Bottom line is that the Poorhouse and the Bulldog Tap are both closed right now, and they were both the first 2 open when the governor opened it up, and they said that they've had scares, and Bulldog was closed for 24 hours and is reopening again tomorrow, which would be today, and that they said the Poorhouse is closed for an undisclosed amount of time. And I was just like, So I guess it just prompted me to think like, what's your, I mean, do people have a plan for exactly how they're gonna handle it if they, but you got a good point there, Kev, like, depends on if it's a staff member or it's a patron, where that person, you know, was, but whatever. Anyway, I was just kind of curious, like, I was kind of shocked that that happened. They both shut down like that, whatever, and I just started to think about that. But what we have plans in place about, you know, exactly what we're going to do or the amount of time that we're going to be down for if these things come up. So
Kevin, I would assume the North Dakota Department of Health would be the ones who would do all the contact tracing and follow the path from that infected person and notify us if we need to worry about our staff. Would that be the plan of how we'd proceed?
Yep, Dave's in constant contact with Chris Holman at Cass Public Health, that's correct.
Okay, and then as far as opening, I would assume they could be a source as well for, okay, these are the areas you might have to worry about.
Yep.
And are we starting swimming lessons?
No,
So no swimming lessons at all?
we will in July.
Okay, and so the pool from what, 9 to noon is empty?
We'll have
Open
open,
or empty?
we'll have open swim three times a day.
But not in the morning?
Wait a minute, lessons, yeah, I'm sorry. Lessons on the indoor pools at the school are no longer because we don't have access to the pools. Yes, we will start swim lessons, sorry.
In July.
That's all right. Just looking for some clarification. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let me throw out just an observation here, and I'll just use golf as an example, and there might be other ones across the district. And maybe just looking at this at a different angle and changing what we do to impact the bottom line. So, I mean, a few things with golf, and I don't know if everyone realizes that I can call in 3 days ahead, make a reservation. And it happens quite frequently, unfortunately. So I can make a reservation for 4 people. There's no consequence if I don't show up for that reservation. And what that potentially means is if someone else paid 4 green fees and cart, that's basically $200 per slot. Another way, I can call in and say I want a foursome, and a lot of people, you know, they know it's only going to be a twosome, but they don't want to play with 2 other people. There again, there's lost revenue. And these are ones that I think that it happens time and time again, and the people in the shop know it, and they know who they are. But just finding a better way to manage your tee sheet when our tee sheets are plump full right now could mean a lot to the bottom line. If you're looking at each slot potentially being $200, say there's 5 of those a day, it's $1,000 a day, times 100 days of summer. I mean, they have 1 course, it could be $100,000. And I'm not asking for the change now, but I think it's something to look into to manage that better. And I know when you book tee times, you know, in Arizona or whatever, I mean, you prepay. And there might be a cancellation policy of 24 hours before, but I mean, that is costing us a lot of money. And I guess all I'm asking for is to look to improve that process and work with the pros, and it's happening a lot, and I think they realize it, but we just kind of sat back and let it happen, and that's what it is. But I think that's more, you know, acting like an entrepreneur in private business, that there's a better way to manage the tee sheet.
Yeah, and I think, Rusty, we talked about that when we met with the pros, and Carolyn can jump in. When we talked about the fee increases, that there are some things we need to look at. It's just kind of too short a notice for this year, but I think our plan is to look at it towards the end of the season, September, and kind of look at, you know, passes. I mean, are we losing money by people buying annual passes and we're losing out on degree fees? Should those be increased? And this is just something else we can look at too, so that's a good idea.
And we also have a better handle now on Fora and what it's able to do for us. with Easy Links and the switch over to Quora. We had a learning curve, as well as we have to figure out if the standards that are allowable by the board can be that if you don't show, you pay. I mean, that's one of the things we do need support from the higher ups, because we can definitely do it, but if they come crying to somebody and they say, no, we'll let you buy, then what?
Well, in our course,
That's right. I think at point of sale, you give your people the power to manage that. And I don't think we have to wait until the end of the season if you have one person constantly booking a foursome, and they know it. You know, it's the regulars, and only 2 people show up every time. I think they just go on a list, and you just say, well, look, we know you're only going to be a twosome. We can book 2 more people with you. And it really shouldn't be someone's choice. It should be our choice. I mean, ideally, we want 4 people in every group.
I would agree with Rusty. I mean, if you're capable of enacting it now, I like the idea of the prepay, and I like the idea of, especially if people are blatantly abusing it, you know, you're going to have just as many people on the opposite side of that are going to be upset that people are taking those tee times and then not using it. And, you know, someone realizes, gosh, people are booking tee times, not showing up, and I can't get in because there's no tee times left. You know, you could have upset customers the same way the opposite side. So, you know, I don't know that we necessarily need to make a formal act on this, but I'm all for the idea of holding customers accountable. And if they book for 4, have them prepay for 4.
Have we had significant instances of this? Do you know, Carolyn?
I would have to check to see how significant it is. I know that we do have in Quora the ability to keep notes on who has or has not. In pushing people to be 2 or foursomes, we've been walking that fine line right now with COVID, because there are some that are not comfortable and want to have 2. And again, we're agreeing, but we're still talking about social distancing, we're still talking about masks. So that one to me is a little bit different story than I book a tea time and don't show up.
I agree with that.
The COVID is maybe a bit of an excuse, but these are regulars that do it all the time. And I don't think COVID's really the excuse, it's just their preference. I think it's everyone's preference. I'd love to play by myself all day long. But I mean, that's not how we should manage a tee sheet. I mean, we shouldn't give people that choice. We should be controlling that.
I think we need to ask the pros their opinion and what kind of timeline you're looking at. Is it prepaid or is there a penalty? If you make a tee time and we hold it with a card or whatever, and there's a penalty for a no-show. I think during the COVID situation, there are still a lot of people who are not comfortable being outside their family unit, and they still are our patrons and our customers. And this year would be very difficult to all of a sudden say we are forcing you to play in a foursome, because we'll lose regulars that way and good people. But I do think that pros can be proactive with the people who are abusing, because they know who they are, and they can sit them down and say, look, Beats, if you do it again, you're out for a month. I mean, there's nothing that says we can't trespass somebody for a certain amount of time because they break the rules, because they can. You know, they have to have a warning. We can't, and I think that it would be unfair we're already in the season. I think it would be unfair to the regular law-abiding, rule-following patrons to all of a sudden have this mandate. But it could be something that we roll out for next year that says, starting in 2020, twosomes will be accommodated if the tee sheet allows. However, it'll be considered that every round is a foursome.
And we can discuss meeting on Monday as well.
Yeah, I mean, can we, I totally am respecting both sides of this equation, but at the same time, I'm with Stacy in the fact that and maybe because I'm not a long-time golfer, but I mean, you call me up on the phone and say, I got a foursome on Tuesday, this is Rick Smith. I got a foursome on Tuesday, this is Rick Smith. Can I get a foursome on Tuesday, this is Rick Smith. Sure, Rick. Are you planning on bringing 4 this time though? Because the last 2 weeks you've only brought 2. I mean, if the other 2 are going to show up, that's great, but otherwise can I just put you down for a twosome? I mean, why can't we call people out like that? I mean, it's not being rude, it's just being honest. I mean, isn't that the easiest place to start?
And I do think that's something that, again, the people that can answer that question are not in the room, and we can discuss it on Monday and definitely make some changes based on how the season is going and what we're seeing as far as numbers.
Perfect.
I want to be careful of, you don't want to come across as being punitive, especially during the COVID era, that we better have a ramp to get to where we want to go and not just turn the light on and say, okay, we're changing the rules today, dang it, and just do it. I think that would send a worse message than the people that are breaking the rules.
Any other questions related to that or the budget information?
Tyson, I do have another question on capitals and just more so direction on where we're going, you know, what projects we're doing, and I get maybe not doing the big ones, but we do have a mill, you know, there to do capitals, and I don't want to just push everything aside and not do anything and move it out where then preventative maintenance wise and some of this other stuff costs more money. One that comes to mind is just on, I'll just pick one out, is Brunsdale. So we talked about the 2 youth fields and, you know, kind of just wondering where we are with that. And now pickleball is rising to the top 2, where we talked about pickleball for a while. And I have talked to Dave Beats a little bit and just wondering, I mean, you have a group, you know, with pickleball that's very active right now and are wanting to expand the 6 to 9. And I think I've heard at one point that the Brunsdales have offered that they might have some interest, and I don't know where that is right now, that they may donate some more money to expand the courts. So, I mean, on those, I kind of like to know where we are with Brunsdale, but and then maybe just an overall theory on capitals on what the plan is.
So Rusty, at the last budget meeting, we presented kind of what our capitals plans were, what we're planning on spending on capitals. I don't know that Brunsdale was included, but maybe that's changed. I don't know if Beats or Leaker, if you could touch on that. But we are meeting our obligation for the Parks and Rec facility, that mill levy. But then beyond that, you know, we weren't planning on doing any major capitals this year.
And I'll jump in and Beats can jump in. You know, we have met with Fargo Youth Baseball. Dave's been working with Alex and Ryan on the 2 youth fields at Brunsdale. They actually just met with them, I think, yesterday. Yeah. So I think we do want to take advantage of that. There are some questions we just got to make sure we research. We've got, you know, putting those 2 fields facing west. And there probably won't be any issues with foul balls from those new fields because the kids are so young, going back to the east with people watching, but there might be some foul ball issues with the 2 existing fields getting foul balls hit to the people watching the youth field. So I want to make sure we take care of that or any issues. I know we've had that down at Davies. We don't want to create another fly ball zone at Brunsdale. Also along with those fields, we got, and as you mentioned, Rusty, 3 additional pickleball courts. If we do both of those, and even if we do one of those, we've got to look at our parking out there. And that's going to be like the majority of the expense is adding, I don't know, is it another 25% parking, 50% parking? The 2 youth fields are relatively inexpensive. Brian's going to donate the irrigation. We would install the fencing and do the work on the field. So that cost is relatively low. It's going to be, you know, adding additional parking to that park. And then we're also going to work with Fargo Youth Baseball on the large field down there and what can be done there. So all that equates to more additional parking and along with the pickleball courts. We've talked about either sending out a notice to the neighborhood and letting them know what kind of our master plan is for that park and are there any concerns. So Dave and Kevin have been working with Fargo Youth Baseball on that. You know, we still want to do that road at Lindenwood. We're still working through the approval process with the city. Are we good to go on that? Or?
No, we're still working through that.
Still working through that with the city and the floodways. So that is a major project we want, and probably won't get it started this year, but we get it started in 2021. So I don't know, Dave, if you want to jump into any of this.
Yeah, Rusty, on the Brunsdale fields, Kevin and I met down there yesterday with Fargo Youth Baseball, Alex and Ryan, and then Ryan's irrigation person from his company. Our plan is to remove the light standards that are still existing from the hockey rink that was there in the next couple of weeks. We're having Tyler in our office now work on finding expanded parking and putting a cost to that. The big expenses with those two fields are basically now just boiling down to fencing. You know, there'll be a little cost there with AgriLime. We have been able to salvage some AgriLime through a school field being taken out at Lewis and Clark, and then also the Lindenwood fields, but we'll still need some. So there'll be a little expense there, and then just fencing. As Dave mentioned, Ryan is willing, if we give him notice in the next 3 weeks, he is willing to install the irrigation, so I don't really want to turn away from that type of a gift. That's, you know, probably around a $30,000 donation there that he would be making. So that's something significant. I think we got to work hard to try and accommodate. On the pickleball side of things, we're working up those numbers right now. You're correct. I had a conversation with Mr. Brunsdale about a year ago now. I was working on another project with him that kind of turned the wrong way in his mind. Not anything that the park district did, but other entities in Fargo were not acting in the way that he felt was maybe the best way. So he resigned himself from that project, and he made just kind of a passing comment to me that said, you know, if you ever want to look at doing something with pickleball, let me know. So I want to re-engage with him here shortly once we have numbers to talk about, and I know you and I talked about some other potential donors for pickleball. So right now, Tyler's working up those costs. He's also looking at finding us expanded parking down there, because I have a feeling just from what conversations I've had with users of that park, both baseball and pickleball, that parking does become an issue at certain times. So we want to be ready for that once we make our notification to the neighborhood, you know, that we're thinking of those things and have an answer for it. So we kind of have a tight timeline realistically in my viewpoint, but the big thing I'd like to have is the costs that we anticipate it will cost, and then start engaging in some of these discussions.
What does Fargo Youth Baseball say about parking? Because I think when all this was presented, it's my recollection that they didn't feel parking was that big of an issue between the two lots we have on the north and then the one on the east side. And I want to say combined, I don't know if there's like 150 spaces, you know, plus or minus.
Yeah, they say there's enough there, but, you know, I've got contradictory messages from people that are in their program that tell me that there's not enough there. We have staff members here that their kids participate in their program, and those folks have said that there really isn't enough parking. And so it's one of those things that we want to still have spaces available for general park use. We want to have spaces available for pickleball. And we want to have enough spaces for when there is a large event there. And I know you can't always build things for the largest event, but we want to be able to have that, at least a reasonable suggestion that we can cover that when those questions arise from all these individuals, that yes, we have thought about parking and we've added whatever that percentage is, you know, to adequately answer those questions when they come.
I went to a game on Monday night, and I just went to the north parking lot because I guess that's just where I ended up going, and what a nightmare. You get stuck in there and you can't turn around. People have to go, I mean, because people are parked sideways and taking up what isn't actual parking spots in there. And so people are pulling over to the side to let somebody go through or whatever. I ended up out on the residential street. And that's the parking lot right next to the batting cage / pickleball court. So I don't know if I should have been somewhere else, but it definitely was a nightmare. So there's that.
And if you add 2 more youth fields, you got to just figure that's 10, 11 kids times 1.5, you know, that's 40, that's 60 more spots you need. So we just need to do the due diligence and make sure we have adequate parking, you know, because Fargo Youth Baseball says that east lot is not utilized to its potential. So we just need to make sure and And if you have, if they do improvements to that big field and use that more, I mean, that's a lot of potential parking there.
If we can get through to the neighborhood and kind of pass that hurdle in my mind, and, you know, that will kind of open the door at least where I think we could start doing a lot of this work in-house, and Fargo Youth Baseball is agreeable that, you know, these fields might not be ready next year as they had intended. But to turn away from the irrigation gift and you know, lose out on that, we're really trying hard to get it fit in, and, you know, I'd like to be turning dirt over there right now with our crews and making those fields, but we kind of got to get these preliminary things out of the way before, because I don't want to, you know, start that endeavor and then have a huge pushback from the neighborhood, because we have had comments in the past about baseball and soccer and everything else that goes there, but we just want to make sure that we're including the neighborhood in what we intend to do and try and have answers for those questions if they have any.
Any other questions? All right, real quick here before we get or let everybody go. As you know, we talked about the FMCT at the last facilities committee meeting, and right now, Andy Noah, you know, he's very conservative, and obviously with the right, we want to make sure we get approval from the city, approval from the railroad. To move forward, there's also a political decision about allowing any additional encroachment into Island Park, and that's a kind of a question for the commissioners. But, you know, LOBs did talk to me after the facilities committee meeting, and they're worried about having to wait for an answer from the railroad on whether they can even reconstruct their roof to get ready for the winter season. So she asked for a time to sit up and speak with me. I asked Jerry if he'd be willing to attend, so we're going to meet with her on Monday. But, you know, it's like walking on eggshells with the way the covenants are stated. You know, the railroad says park purposes solely, and I'm no lawyer, but I think that's up to your current commission to interpret what park purposes are. I mean, back in the 1800s, early 1900s, it was probably trees and grass. Today it's trees, grass, programs, events, everything about parks. I think FMCT's been a good partner with the park district. I think they offer recreational opportunities for kids and adults alike. So again, it comes down to, you know, a commissioner interpretation of what's allowable in there. And in the past, we've granted access encroachments into that park with encroachment agreements. I don't know if the railroad would ever, you know, say anything that those are wrong. I mean, provided we're not putting up condos and hotels. So I think Eloise is just looking for some direction from the commissioners, because trying to get an answer from the railroad that she can proceed with her reconstruction may take 1 month, it may take 6 to 18 months, and I don't think they have the ability to sit there and not at least reconstruct their building. So I just want to throw that out to the commissioners and see what everybody's individual thoughts are, since this is a public meeting.
Well, I don't know that this is a commissioner decision as much as it's a legal decision. And as a commissioner, I don't want to be making a decision based on what I think might be allowable versus what is legally allowable. And as I stated in the facilities meeting, I think it's up to them, FMCT, to do their due diligence to determine if it's even legal, rather than us incurring the time and expense of determining that.
Thank you.
And I agree with that, because I think that's what our legal advice has been. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's pretty clear it's for park use, and that's really not open to interpretation.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Still pondering.
But I do think we owe them some direction so they don't just spin their wheels. And like you said, dealing with the railroad, and I'm dealing with them right now on something else. I mean, there's no sense of urgency, and it could be, like you say, 18 months down the road. But I think we need to provide that direction on, is this something we're going to approve? And I think either way, we need to get a new contract with them. No one on a landlord or tenant wants to survive month to month. And that needs to be renewed with what the terms are. And I think part of that is throwing in the parking too. I mean, we're basically giving this, and I want to remove it. It's not arts. I mean, to me, it doesn't matter who's in there. I don't want it to be a, park district against the arts. It's anyone that's in that building. There needs to be a renewed contract. That person should expect to pay for parking. And right now there's a parking lot across the way that, they're not paying anything for it. And the north, maybe fourth, is in decent shape. And before too long, we're going to be doing an overlay on that parking lot. So I think it's just a matter of being fair more than anything.
Yeah, and we do provide parking for other user groups around town, Fargo Youth Hockey, Fargo Youth Baseball, Curling Club, so there's some precedents there. Andre?
So if my hockey group wants to come in and rent Southwest, you throw in the parking lot for free? Is what you're saying?
Well, I mean, yeah.
Because they're renting our
And like
space.
Teamsters, I mean, they use our parking lot up there
Okay.
that we constructed.
So
Fargo Youth
now-
Baseball, we just overlaid that parking lot.
So that would be the same thing with FMCT using our parking lot across the street because it's part of the facility.
It's an adjacent facility.
I like
Well,
the
it's part of the facility, but they're not paying anything. They're renting our space for nothing. I mean, I think that's different than saying Fargo Youth Hockey. I mean, there's a rental fee associated with that, and part of that is covering our expenses.
But it could be part of the contract that we renegotiate for the rent or the space that they're occupying. Would you say, Carolyn?
My other comparison is people like the zoo. They have a facility, they have the land, and whatever happens on the land, they're responsible for it. So that could be more of the FMCT view that you have as well, because they're not really a tenant like the people that come to RDJ or come to the hockey arenas.
But it's my understanding that the zoo did their own parking lot, right?
Correct.
Right, because that was part of the land that they had available.
Right.
And that was written into that agreement at the time that, they are responsible for those types of things. So I think that's the point that's trying to be made here is there's an opportunity as we move forward here to include some of that to cover the costs that fall to the park district.
And just for future generations to know what the intent was.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'd also add into the agreement at some point, the programming outside in that patio area. It's gonna take away from, they're gonna go down that road of weddings and everything else. It's gonna take away from our rentals in Island Park.
Right.
Well,
I get that. I get that.
Safeguard our
Correct.
interests.
Absolutely, Kevin.
To know what their business plan is. That would, we know what the structure is gonna look like, what the encroachment considerations are, but what's the future look like for that? That would be my question. What are they gonna become bigger in the theater world, and in what way? I think that they're a great asset to our community, and they've been there for a long time, and it does come down to interpretation. And 100 years ago, a park was a few trees and not even a path. So but we've got concrete paths, we've got natural paths, we have trees, we have gazebos, swimming pools. I mean, they're all structures of some kind, and they create a recreational opportunity for people. And so we just have to look at what does that mean. We can't read the minds of everybody going backwards. NP gave it to the city of Fargo, and now they're owned by the Burlington Northern Railroad. So there's a whole other thing on top of it. And, you know, and we do owe them some respect on how to move forward and what to do, because they have a facility that needs to be repaired so that they can operate as is, not even futuristic operating, so.
And with the activity down there in that parking lot with basketball, the skateboarders, I don't know because I haven't seen the plans. Is Prairie St. John's and Hospital down there expanding to the north into that parking lot? You know, is it different? Because I know there are people that overflow parking with the skateboarders and such. Is that going to impact the parking availability down there?
They're taking some of their lot out, it'll become a retention pond on the north end of where their lot is now.
Okay.
Between ours and ours, yeah.
Okay.
And does the city weighs in, if I were to build a new structure up and say I expect to have 500 people coming and going, the city will say, well, because of that, you need to have X amount of parking spots.
Yeah, they'll have to weigh in, approve the building permit and part of the requirements.
So it'd be nice to know what that ratio is.
Right.
I think too, you know, there's a more urgent need is the repair.
Right.
And so, you know, would we allow that versus the expansion and the encroachment into the park? At least in my mind, that's how I think, you know.
Yeah,
if
I agree. I agree, Dave. I think they are two separate things. I think the repair of their building that they're using for theater things is one issue, and their expansion, which to me turns into banquet / wedding / every private group who wants to be in there versus truly the arts, is a whole nother issue. But again, for both of them, I don't think it's the commissioner's just choice to decide whether something is legal or not. I think that's a legal issue. And at the end of the day, whatever happens, we need to make sure that a lease is buttoned up and stays current.
Well, I'll just say there, I agree, Vicki, there is a legal issue there, but we can decide as a board what we tell them they can do, because as Andy Noah said, they could go get the, you know, the loan from a bank and do their construction and do everything, and 2 years down the road, find out that the legal interpretation is such that, sorry, you gotta move off. And, you know, so I don't know that the legal necessarily drives what the board tells the FMCT they can do, because ultimately, when the legal opinion comes down, if it's against their expansion, then we've got a different kettle of fish to fry.
But if we give them permission to go ahead and do something and then it turns out to not be allowable, are we going to be held liable for their expenses and everything they incur because we said, yep, you can do this? So that's my concern, is basically giving them permission to go ahead when I don't even know if it's an allowable thing.
Oh, I think that could be written into the lease with a disclaimer that says you're taking this liability upon yourself and hold the park district harmless to whatever future judgments come.
I don't think so.
If they want to proceed like that.
And that may be what's necessary in order to give them permission to do the repair. Something of that nature that protects the park district. And then, you know, it's a much larger decision, I think, based on the expansion and moving into portions of the park.
Right.
Well, I mean, if things opened up and we don't want to get to that point, I mean, if all of a sudden the railroads, and I'm not a railroad expert, I just couldn't believe that they're going to come in and say, you've got to remove that building. Because if they do that, they're going to say, you're going to have to cut off the south 10.5 feet of the YMCA and remove that too. I just don't think that would happen, but I'm on that. But so I mean, there's a lot of things out there that, you know, for grandfathered in or squatters' rights or whatever. I mean, if we've allowed no encroachment.
So can we say that we support them repairing their roof? For our blessing per se, but under no circumstances whatsoever are we leveraging a legal opinion, and that they understand moving forward that, you know, when that legal opinion eventually comes, we have no say in that matter. We're just.
I think you could write, I mean, the attorneys could write a disclaimer in there that would allow them to repair their roof, realizing that a legal opinion could still be pending you know, and then the liability's back on them. And then you just say, you know what, they're two separate things, as Vicky said, is we're gonna allow you to repair your roof, but at this time, you know, the expansion's still in question. And then again, then that comes back to the park district. Are you gonna put up with that?
Allowing them to repair their roof is not leveraging any sort of legal opinion. You know, with the notion that could be the, that I, you know, and then like you said, we can deal with that other portion separately, but I would like to see us at least, you know, support that and then leave it on them to figure this thing legally out as far as whether or not they can. I mean, I don't know. It's just, lawyers are getting rich off of us trying to figure this thing out for them. So we're spending a lot of money on lawyers to find out for them if they can get their roof. That's a completely different subject matter than the expansion.
And I think they'd have to do their research with the railroad and granting permission. I don't think the city would be an issue, but you know, you're gonna get permission from the railroad. But I think if the commissioners concur, we could have, you know, our legal counsel, Andy Noah, draft up or make the agreement current, allowing them to repair their roof and kind of write in all those things about, you know, parking and everything, and at least allow them to be what they were.
I don't think we should be making a decision at a budget committee meeting.
No.
Well, no, we're just looking for direction.
I understand, but I don't think we should be giving you any direction at a budget committee meeting. I think having conversations and discussion is fine, but I don't think we can make any decisions to give any direction on this. That's just my opinion, that it's, you know, I don't know if it fits under other, but I would guess that it probably doesn't.
So then what is the solution? Put it in as other for our board meeting on Tuesday, or bring it to facilities, or what?
Well, my last understanding was that the ball was in FMCT's court to find out if this is something that could legally happen, as far as the roof repair for one and the potential expansion for the other, with the expense being on them and not our legal counsel or the park district. So my understanding is the ball is in their court to come back to us. Would that be what everybody else interpreted it as?
Yeah, I'm just saying that the other option in this is that we give them permission to move forward with the notion that it has no bearing on the legality, and that's their hill to climb, and then handle the expansion as a completely separate discussion. And then that puts no pressure on us to move forward with the expansion conversation any faster than we're comfortable, because they don't need to get their roof repaired immediately. And if they can't get an opinion for 12 to 18 months on their roof, their roof's screwed. Am I accurate in that?
Well, the roof would survive the winter. It's just that there's so much shoring in there, which basically looks like scaffolding, that it would be unusable if they don't get it repaired properly.
Repaired properly when? Immediately?
Well, if they don't get it repaired prior to this winter, it would be unusable.
It's unusable as it sits now.
Yeah,
they've hired a contractor. They're waiting for permission, in essence, to do the repair.
Yeah, I mean, right now they have wood, whether they're micro lamps or wood trusses in there that have failed, and there's shoring in there that basically looks like, you know, a typical scaffolding system. I mean, beefier. So, I mean, it's all through the stage area, so they wouldn't be able to use it until they rebuilt the roof with steel trusses.
So is it an option, Dave, you mentioned that you and Jerry are meeting with Eloise on Monday. Is there an option to have this as a portion under other, or in, maybe not an agenda item, at the board meeting when all 5 commissioners are present and have time to think a little more? and we get some information from Eloise, and then we say, we're willing to at least do this with the proper legal backing, whether they write the agreement and our team reviews it, our legal reviews it, or vice versa, at least then that's a little bit of a path forward for them to start to take action aside from the expansion discussion.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, I think we could have our attorney draft up a new lease just related to as is, addressing all of our concerns, realizing the liability stands with them and they hold us harmless for any future thing that comes out from the railroad. If the railroad says, I mean, they rebuild the roof, the railroad comes back and says, you gotta get the building, that's their problem.
I don't see that happening. I mean, the building's been there 50, 60 years, whatever. If we gave the approval next Tuesday for them to rebuild their roof, there isn't anybody gonna come back at them and say, no, you can't do that. I just can't believe that would happen.
Well, and that's fine, but that's not for us to necessarily even worry about. Let's just put the wordage in there to make sure that it's not our problem, and that's on them. They're the ones rolling the dice at that point.
Yep. The expansion though, that's a separate, I agree, that's a separate issue that we need to take a little more time to think through and ponder as Commissioner Griggs says.
I mean, even say down the line, the railroad writes off on the expansion, it's still gonna be a commissioner decision whether you're gonna allow them to encroach another 20 feet into the park, because there's residents out there that absolutely do not want any more encroachment into the park, so. I mean, there's a lot of hurdles.
That's the political decision, but right now, so that they can be whole and continue to operate, we need to have an agreement that allows them to do business on their own.
And if that would change, we can add an addendum to that later.
Exactly, and then down the road, when we have all of our homework done and our opinions made, then we can make a decision on whether or not we give up park plan or not, whatever the case may be.
So we could put it on the next week's agenda under other to discuss. I don't know if we'd have the agreement ready by then, but at least we could discuss it and be working towards something.
We don't have other on board agendas.
We don't.
It would have to be an agenda item.
Well, and it can be, can't it? I mean, at this point, the agenda's not printed.
Yep. So we can still add it on if that's what the commissioners would like.
And really at that point, we're eliminating our involvement in trying to figure this out for them anyways. I mean, I know Vicky was saying we've already done that, but I mean, we're really not financially liable for the lawyers to figure this out with the railroad for them anyway. At this point, right? If we say that, go ahead, move forward, if we do. But understand that we're not leveraging a legal opinion, and you're going to have to get that from the railroad. Then we're washing our hands of the paying the lawyers for this, and we're getting our agreement cleaned up.
Which we've been doing with a lot of things. We're just,
right.
It's all housekeeping.
Yep. And I'm gonna not deviate, I promise. On a completely different question, what is our parking lot? And I'll tell you real quickly why I'm asking this question. What's our parking lot situation at 42nd and the baseball diamonds?
I do have a meeting set up with city leaders. Tyson and I will be attending on Thursday, tomorrow. They're still, they're working through their traffic study to decide even if they would proceed with White. I mean, there's a couple questions out there. Do they need, and it wouldn't be a collector through Anderson-Tharaldson, it'd be basically a local road. So the question is, if they put the local road in, well, they don't know if they need that yet. If they put the local road in, do they need to widen 23rd Avenue? If they don't need to widen 23rd Avenue, then the purchase of the right-of-way, they wouldn't need that anymore. I have talked about them that, we would be looking for funds from that right-of-way expansion to build that parking lot on 42nd. So there's a lot of moving parts in there, and I think as part of the conversation, if they did request right-of-way through Anderson Tharaldson, we figure out some way to make that complex better and provide parking for it. So there's just really nothing to report on right now.
Well, and that's fine. My only reason for asking that question is I've heard that there's a potential meeting with the zoo and about discussions about us being more involved with them. And all I'm getting at is if we could partner with the zoo on their parking lot that they don't use 90% of, we wouldn't have to build our own parking lot. So that's a discussion point that can be brought up in that meeting if that happens.
Yeah, all good thoughts.
Brian's on the line.
Oh, if there's no other questions, Brian has joined us now. And there was a question out there about Brian, are you with us?
Yep.
There was a question about the foundation and if it's possible to be self-sustaining through philanthropy or a consistent revenue source with gaming or liquor license. At the time, we talked to you about gaming possibly down at Big Herbs. At that time, we weren't in a position to hire a gaming manager and you had too much on your plate. So that's kind of the question, would we ever think about hiring a gaming manager? I mean, you'd almost need a foundation director or a gaming manager. So your thoughts?
So, my perspective, if the park district or the foundation board is interested in getting into the whole gaming atmosphere, it would take a sort of dramatic restructuring of how the foundation operates. Right now, the foundation has 0 employees that they're paying. My salary, Chrissy's salary when she's doing foundation work, Craig Veer's salary are all covered by the park district. So if we start a gaming operation, assuming the park district is not employing the people that are running the gaming operation, we have to set up a payroll system. Have to figure out a way to handle that. So in my mind, that's kind of a dramatic change in how the foundation operates, which, is a discussion the foundation board and park board can have. It doesn't seem like an appropriate responsibility for me to have on my plate, honestly. And I think my hands are kind of full doing what I do with VSS and the $5 million operation we've got going here. Doing what I'm doing with the foundation now is a little bit more responsibility, throw gaming into the mix, which is a fairly sophisticated operation. And I think we need a different foundation director who can put a lot more resources into managing that. So it's a major policy change, a major policy decision in my mind that needs to have a fairly thorough discussion at the board level, and both boards is what I mean. So I don't know if that answers the question or if it leads to other questions.
Thank you, Brian.
I think, it's come full circle on this. I wasn't even the one that was asking the questions, but because we've kind of put it away and brought it back up, I think it all started with staff was asking the board for direction on how they wanted to go with the foundation, because there was talk of potentially putting a director salary in the budget, and funds or whatever. So I guess what my initial question was well, what is the flavor of the staff, of our staff, and so I guess my question was, as I said, well, I'd prefer to get Brian's perspective. Are you comfortable with leaving things the way that they are for now, as far as you staying in the role at the capacity that you currently are, which is fundraising for sports complex and, you know, doing the match grants, I guess is kind of the extent of what the foundation is currently doing. And do you recommend us staying at that level? And then it took on a like one with discussion gaming and stuff. But again, I know that, as you just said, that gaming is very lucrative, but it's also a lot of work, and you need to make sure that you've dotted your I's and crossed your T's with the state, because you lose a wrist when you do things wrong. So I'm just kidding. Go ahead. My father-in-law has spent his whole life in gaming, so
Sure.
and the bar business, so I know how it works. But anyway.
Yeah, so that was a few questions.
Sorry.
Sure, I'm comfortable doing what I'm doing right now with the foundation. I think eventually, you know, it makes sense for the park district to make a decision. Well, how do they want the foundation to exist? Do they want it to exist kind of as it is right now, which is a kind of a lower level operation? Or do they want to have a foundation director, you know, whose charge is to raise money, to operate the foundation, and, you know, expand the role of the foundation as an entity in the community? If that's the direction the board wants to go, obviously there needs to be a different person appointed to run the foundation. You know, I think we all know that this is a part-time gig for me, and that it fits only because, you know, we're not making it into a more serious operation. You know, so if there's a change desired, I think the foundation board, the park board need to have a real serious discussion about how they make that change happen. And then who the person is that they want, you know, to do that. I'm on the twilight of my career, which doesn't mean that I'm done next week or next year even, but I'm kind of on my way phasing out with the park district. If there's going to be a change with the foundation, you know, a substantial change, I think we need to figure out who the person's going to be to manage that change. So that's off the cuff remarks.
I think that you know, when the vision, you know, where the vision came from for the foundation, and then, you know, the steps, and Tyson's just saying that the next step was this, and I guess he's trying to get a feel if anybody in the room felt like it's time to take it to the next step. And, you know, and I guess I can say first and foremost, and if anybody disagrees, then so be it. I think, you know, where the foundation sits right now, the flavor of the world and what we're dealing with, I'm very comfortable with the foundation being and where it's at. I think it works really well with the match program. You know, it gives us that exposure, yet at the same time, it doesn't force us to operate on a major level. And I think there's nothing wrong with where the foundation's at right now, and I don't see any reason why we need to take it to the next level. And I appreciate your work, Brian. You're doing a great job at the capacity you're doing it.
Thanks.
No, I agree with you. I mean, I might say something different if we weren't in the middle of this pandemic, but if we wanted to expand now, I mean, you're basically setting someone up for failure for short term, because, I mean, businesses are in survival mode, not giving mode, and I don't know when that changes, but I don't think you need to rush to hire someone now when it can just be something that's on the radar.
That this isn't something we want to decide at a budget meeting. I think we need to have further conversations and develop a plan that looks out over the next 5 years, 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. And I didn't want to make any decisions here, but we're giving direction to Tyson as far as putting funds into the budget for the year. So I think we can, I think we could say that he doesn't need to put funds in there for an executive director. And at the same time, we should put a vision and, you know, a long-term plan together for what we see the foundation doing in a completely separate meeting and discussion and whatever.
But the funds that are in there, wasn't his question, do we have enough funds to get through 2021?
I
That was
think,
the question, right?
yeah, I think Tyson could put 50,000 in there as a placeholder. He talked about 40, but put 50 in there for now, and that'll get us through the next year.
Just to get us through as is.
Yep.
And that's how it all started.
Yep, so I mean, that's the direction we need, so.
Yep, that makes sense.
Yep.
Any other items? Questions, insight? All right, well, we didn't quite get done in an hour, Tyson, but we did pretty good, so hour and 40 minutes.
I think we worked pretty hard to stretch it.
Tyson, got final comments?
We were just waiting for Brian to get here. I mean, we wouldn't have been a proper budget meeting if we didn't get to see Brian's smiling face. So if we'd have finished in an hour, we wouldn't have gotten to see him. So here we are.
Glad I didn't disappoint you.
Tyson?
Nope, no other comments. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Here, it's like
See you guys.